She found 20 vampire men in black coats circling her father's grave. Vampire King was paying a debt. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. It was a cold, moonless night when Emily stood alone in the cemetery, staring at her father's grave. Her heart ached with the quiet loss that had settled over her for years. The wind blew softly, rattling the old trees that stood like silent sentinels around her. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the city. Yet tonight, something felt off, something she couldn't explain. As she knelt down to place the bouquet of white lilies on her father's grave, she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. At first, she thought it was the wind playing tricks on her, but then she saw them, 20 men in black coats, standing in a perfect circle around her father's tombstone. They weren't moving, their eyes hidden beneath dark hoods. The sight sent a chill down Emily's spine. She froze for a moment, unsure if she was just imagining things. As her breath caught in her throat, one of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. His eyes glinted a sharp, unnatural amber in the dim light. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and commanding, sending a shiver through her body. Emily could barely speak. I was just visiting my father," she stammered, her voice shaking. The man looked down at her with a cold, unreadable gaze. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly, as if recognizing something about her. "You don't know who we are, do you?" he asked, his tone now softer, almost curious. Emily shook her head, her mind racing with questions. Who were these men? Why were they here? And why did they look so strange? The man stepped closer, the others following suit, their movements synchronized and unsettling. "We are the ones your father made a debt to," the man said, his voice darkening. "And now, his debt must be paid." A cold, heavy weight settled in Emily's chest as she tried to comprehend his words. The man's words echoed in her mind. His debt must be paid. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the realization began to sink in. Her father had been more than just a simple man. He had been entangled with something far darker, something beyond her understanding. The man's eyes never left her face, watching her closely as if waiting for her reaction. The words Vampire King flickered in her mind, but they made no sense. She had only ever heard such things in stories. But here, in the silence of the cemetery, they seemed all too real. What was her father's connection to them? Why had he made such a dangerous deal? And now, what would happen to her? The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Your father's actions are long past, but the debt he owed, it is yours now," he said, his voice like ice. Emily's knees went weak, but she refused to show fear. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes flickered with something akin to amusement. "You will come with us. We will take you to the Vampire King. The debt your father owed, it must be settled, and you are the one to do it." The man's cold eyes never left Emily as the realization of his words began to sink in. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to process what was happening. The debt must be paid. His words echoed in her head, like a sentence she could not escape. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach as the 20 men around her began to move, stepping toward her in perfect unison, their black coats swishing with each step. The tall man who had spoken before approached her with slow, deliberate steps. He was closer now, and Emily could feel the weight of his presence pressing down on her. "You will come with us," he said again, his voice softer, but no less menacing. "The Vampire King is waiting for you." Emily swallowed hard, fighting the wave of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "Vampire King," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" The man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't comforting. It was a cold, knowing smile, one that made Emily's blood run cold. "Your father's debt was to him," the man explained, his voice steady. "And now it is yours." He reached out, taking her by the arm with surprising gentleness, guiding her through the circle of men. Emily felt the eyes of the others on her, the weight of their gaze almost unbearable. She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, his strength far greater than any human could possess. "Where are we going?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fear and uncertainty. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly, as though considering her question. "To the Vampire King's fortress," he said after a pause. "You will see him, and you will settle your father's debt." Emily's breath hitched. The word fortress sent a chill down her spine. She had heard stories of the Vampire King, but she had always thought them to be nothing more than myths, tales spun to frighten children. Now, standing here in the cemetery with the dark circle of men surrounding her, she realized the stories were far from fiction. "What does he want from me?" Emily asked, trying to steady her voice, though her heart was racing with dread. The man beside her glanced down at her, his expression unreadable. "You will find out soon enough," he said cryptically. "The king always gets what he wants." The air around them seemed to grow colder as the man's words sank in. Emily could feel the temperature drop, and it wasn't just the chill of the night air. It felt unnatural, like something far darker was pressing in on her. She didn't understand any of this, but she knew she had no choice but to follow them. As the group began to move, Emily couldn't help but glance back at her father's grave one last time. The man who had been buried there, the man she had loved and lost, had somehow become tangled up in this terrifying world. She had always believed he was just an ordinary man, a father who had worked hard for everything he had. But now, she realized that was a lie. The life she thought she knew was shattered, and the truth about her father's past was darker than she could have ever imagined. The men in black coats moved with eerie precision, leading her away from the graveyard and toward an unknown fate. Emily's mind raced with questions, but no answers came. All she could do was follow, her steps heavy with the weight of what was to come. They walked for what felt like hours, through dark streets and abandoned alleyways, until they reached a massive iron gate. The gate was imposing, tall, and covered in ancient runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. The men stopped in front of it, and one of them stepped forward, pressing a hand to the gate. There was a soft rumble, and the gates creaked open, revealing a dark, foreboding castle on the other side. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she looked up at the towering structure. It was like something out of a nightmare. The walls were black as night, and the windows were like hollow eyes staring back at her. She could feel the presence of something powerful inside, something ancient and dangerous. "This is where it all ends," the man beside her said, his voice low. "The Vampire King is waiting." The words sent a fresh wave of dread crashing over Emily. She had no idea what awaited her inside, but one thing was clear. Her life had just been irrevocably changed. The debt her father had left behind was hers to pay now, and whatever that meant, she was about to find out. The gate creaked open, and Emily could feel the weight of the dark castle looming before her. The air grew colder as she crossed the threshold, the scent of old stone and centuries of history filling her nostrils. Her footsteps echoed off the grand hallway as the men in black coats flanked her, their eyes never leaving her form. The walls were adorned with ancient tapestries that seemed to move in the flickering light of the torches lining the corridor. It was a sight she had only read about in stories, dark, mysterious, and terrifyingly real. The grandeur of the castle overwhelmed her, but it was the palpable sense of danger that gripped her chest. This was no ordinary place. It was a stronghold, a kingdom, one that was far beyond her understanding. She had only ever heard whispers about the Vampire King, but now she was here, walking into the heart of his domain. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly from the fear that had lodged in her throat. The tall man beside her, who had led her here, turned his gaze toward her, his amber eyes glowing in the dim light. "The Vampire King is waiting for you," he said, his tone chillingly calm. "It's time to settle your father's debt." Emily's stomach churned as she tried to process the enormity of his words. What did this mean for her? What did it mean to settle a debt to a creature like the Vampire King? Was there even a way to escape this fate? As they continued through the castle, Emily caught glimpses of strange, shadowy figures moving just out of sight, the flicker of their movements almost too fast for her to follow. She felt as though she were being watched by eyes that had existed for centuries. Her heart pounded in her chest as the tension in the air grew thicker. They reached a large, imposing door at the end of the hall. The door itself was made of dark wood, intricately carved with symbols she couldn't recognize. It felt ancient, as though it had been part of this place for as long as time itself. The man stepped forward and placed a hand on the door. There was a soft hiss, and the door creaked open slowly, revealing a throne room that was both grand and terrifying. The room was vast, with high, vaulted ceilings and a floor made of smooth, black marble. The throne sat at the far end, raised on a platform, and on it sat a figure that seemed to radiate power. The Vampire King. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. He was everything the legends had said and more. His eyes were a brilliant shade of gold, glowing faintly in the darkness. His skin was pale, almost ethereal, and his dark hair fell in waves around his shoulders. He exuded an aura of authority and danger that made it hard to breathe. He didn't move as she entered the room, but Emily could feel his gaze on her, sharp and calculating. The man beside her stepped forward, bowing low in respect. "Your Majesty, she is here," he said, his voice reverent. The Vampire King didn't speak for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Emily. She felt a chill run down her spine as the silence stretched on. Finally, he spoke, his voice deep and commanding, echoing through the room. "You are the daughter of the one who owed me a debt," he said, his tone unwavering. Emily couldn't respond. Her mind was spinning with questions, but she couldn't find the words. She had never imagined this moment would come, and now that it was here, she felt small and powerless. "Your father made a deal with me," the Vampire King continued, his voice colder now. "A deal that must be fulfilled." His gaze softened for just a moment, almost imperceptibly. "And now, it is your turn to honor that deal." Emily's heart raced. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The Vampire King's eyes glittered, a slight smile playing on his lips. "I want you to take his place." The words hit her like a blow. "Take his place?" she repeated, her voice shaking. The Vampire King nodded slowly. "Your father's debt was not just a simple matter of gold or favor," he explained. "It was a matter of power, and it is now your responsibility to carry it." Emily took a step back, her mind reeling. "Power," she repeated. "What kind of power?" The Vampire King leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "The kind that can shape worlds," he said, his voice a low whisper that seemed to vibrate in the air. "The kind that can change everything." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the way he said it, the weight in his voice, it sounded like something she couldn't escape. The room seemed to close in around her as she tried to understand the gravity of the situation. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The Vampire King's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something dark in his eyes. "Refusal is not an option," he said, his voice like ice. "You will take his place, or the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She didn't know what this power was, or how it worked, but she knew one thing for sure. She was trapped. And whatever came next, she had no choice but to face it. Emily stood frozen, her mind spinning as the Vampire King's words echoed in the vast throne room. The weight of his gaze bore down on her, and her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. "Take his place." The words kept repeating in her head, over and over, each time feeling more suffocating. She couldn't breathe. The Vampire King was offering her a choice, but it wasn't a choice at all. There was no way to escape. "I don't understand," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. She was trying to grasp what was happening, but the more she thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. Power that could shape worlds. How could she even begin to comprehend something like that? The Vampire King's eyes softened slightly, but there was no warmth in them. "You will learn," he said calmly, as though reading her mind. "The debt your father owed me was not just a monetary debt. It was a debt of blood, power, and legacy." Emily's stomach lurched. Blood. She had heard enough stories to know what that meant. And legacy? Her father was nothing but a quiet, hard-working man in her eyes. What kind of legacy could he have left that was tied to something as dark and ancient as this? "I don't want this," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for any of this." The Vampire King did not react, his expression unchanged. He leaned back slightly in his throne, his golden eyes still locked on hers. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice low and final. "It was your father's deal, and now it is yours. His bloodline will carry this burden, whether you want it or not. Emily's mind raced, desperately searching for an escape, but there was none. Her thoughts were a blur, and a deep sense of dread settled over her. This wasn't just about paying a debt. This was about becoming something she couldn't understand. Something she never wanted to be. What does it mean, taking his place? She asked, her voice shaking but determined to know. The Vampire King sat up straighter, his expression unreadable. It means you will inherit his pact, the power he borrowed, the forces he called upon. You will take up his mantle and carry it for as long as you live. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Life. How long was that? What would it mean for her life if she agreed to this? And if she didn't? She couldn't afford to think about the consequences of defying him. The thought of the Vampire King's wrath alone made her knees feel weak. But I'm not like him, Emily said, the words coming out more like a plea than a statement. I don't know anything about this world. I don't know what you want from me. I can't, her voice faltered. The Vampire King tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. It is not about what you know, he said after a long pause. It's about what is already within you. Your father made sure of that. Emily's mind went blank. What did that mean? I don't understand, she whispered. The Vampire King's gaze softened just the slightest, almost imperceptibly. Your father was not just any man, he said. He was one of the few who held the blood of ancient power. His debt to me was sealed long ago, but his true purpose was never revealed to you. Until now. Emily's heart raced. She was starting to understand, but it was a truth too terrifying to accept. Her father had been more than just a man. He had been involved in something far darker than she had ever imagined. Something that now threatened to drag her into the same web of darkness. I don't want this power, she said, her voice desperate. I don't want any of this. Please, there must be another way. The Vampire King's gaze hardened. There is no other way. The power is part of you now. You may not accept it, but it will be forced upon you, one way or another. You cannot run from this. Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing inward with an invisible force. You will serve me, the Vampire King continued. In exchange for your father's debt, you will take his place and rule at my side. You will become the heir to a legacy that has lasted for centuries. Emily shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't do this. She didn't want to do this. But as the Vampire King's piercing gaze fixed on her, she realized there was no way out. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, bound by a debt she hadn't chosen. The choice wasn't hers anymore. What happens if I refuse? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. The Vampire King's expression remained unreadable, his voice low and dangerous. You will not refuse, he said. If you do, you will face the consequences of breaking the pact. And those consequences will be far worse than anything you can imagine. Emily's blood ran cold at the thought of what he meant. She didn't want to know what those consequences could be, but deep down, she knew there was no way out. Whatever fate awaited her, she would have to face it head on. And there was no turning back. Emily stood in front of the Vampire King, her heart hammering in her chest as his words echoed in her mind. There was no escape. Her fate was sealed, and she had no choice but to face the reality of the situation. The power, the legacy, it was all part of her now, no matter how much she wanted to deny it. You will serve me, he had said. The weight of those words pressed down on her like an unbreakable chain. There was no way out, no turning back. But even as she stood there, trembling with fear, a part of her began to understand. Her father's debt was hers to pay, and it wasn't just a debt of money or favor. It was a debt of blood, a bond that tied her to this world of darkness and power. The Vampire King's gaze never wavered, his golden eyes piercing into her soul. Your training begins now, he said, his voice commanding and unyielding. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Training, she repeated, barely able to comprehend what he meant. The Vampire King nodded slowly. You will learn what it means to wield the power that is now yours. You will learn the ways of the vampire, how to control the forces your father dealt with, and how to uphold the legacy that has been passed down to you. Emily felt a wave of nausea wash over her. How could she ever learn to control something so foreign, so terrifying? She wasn't a part of this world. She was a human. Or at least, she had been. Now, she was something else. Something she didn't fully understand. "Come with me," the Vampire King ordered, rising from his throne with an eerie grace. Emily hesitated for a moment, her feet rooted to the ground. But the presence of the Vampire King was overwhelming, and before she knew it, she was following him through the castle's dark corridors. The air seemed colder the deeper they went, the silence pressing down on her with each step. The only sound was the echo of their footsteps, the distant flicker of torchlight casting long shadows along the walls. Emily felt as though she were walking through a nightmare, trapped in a place that was both ancient and alive, filled with power she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hall, a massive wooden door adorned with strange, glowing symbols. The Vampire King placed his hand on the door, and it creaked open with a sound that sent chills through Emily's body. Inside was a large room, dark and vast, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch endlessly upward. At the center of the room was a large stone table, covered in ancient books and strange artifacts that seemed to hum with a life of their own. Emily stepped forward, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "This is where you will begin your training," the Vampire King said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Here, you will learn the true nature of the power you now possess." Emily's heart raced as she looked around the room, her mind spinning with questions. How could she learn to control such power? How could she possibly understand something so foreign to her? "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You must open your mind," he said. "You must embrace the blood that runs through your veins, the legacy of your father. Only then will you begin to understand what you are capable of." He motioned to the stone table. "Start with the books. They will teach you the basics. The rest will come with time." Emily nodded, though she felt no comfort in his words. She had no idea how she would ever learn to control this power, or if she even wanted to. But there was no choice. She had already taken the first step into this world, and there was no going back. As she approached the table, the books seemed to call to her, their ancient pages filled with knowledge she couldn't even begin to understand. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the first book, its leather cover cold to the touch. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the strange symbols on the pages. They were written in a language she didn't recognize, but something deep within her seemed to stir as she looked at them. It was as if the words themselves were alive, calling to her, urging her to understand. She flipped through the pages, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. She could feel the power in the air, thick and heavy, as though the very room itself was alive with magic. And then, she felt it. A sudden surge of energy, like a bolt of lightning coursing through her veins. She gasped, her body trembling as the power flooded her senses. It was overwhelming, intoxicating. She wanted to pull away, but the force of it held her in place, urging her to give in, to embrace the power that was now hers. "You are learning," the Vampire King said from behind her, his voice soft but full of authority. "You will feel this power within you. It is part of who you are now." Emily's breath came in shallow gasps as the power surged through her, her body shaking with the intensity of it. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, like nothing she had ever experienced before. She could feel the blood in her veins, the ancient magic coursing through her, and for a moment, she almost thought she could understand it. But then the feeling began to fade, the power slipping away from her grasp. She stumbled back, her head spinning. The Vampire King was watching her closely, his golden eyes unreadable. "You must learn to control it," he said. "You cannot let it control you." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she could do that. How could she control something so overwhelming, so all-encompassing? But she had no choice. She had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back. She was bound to this world now, and the power that came with it, whether she was ready for it or not. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the lingering effects of the strange power still hummed within her veins. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling as she fought to steady herself. The books on the table seemed to pulse with energy, their ancient pages still open before her. But the surge of magic that had flooded her senses moments ago left her feeling disoriented, drained. The Vampire King's presence behind her was like a heavy weight pressing down on her, reminding her that she had no choice but to learn, to adapt. It is just the beginning. The Vampire King's voice cut through the fog in her mind. His tone was calm, almost detached, as though he expected her to simply accept what had just happened. The power within you is vast, but it is also dangerous. You must learn to control it. Emily could feel the sweat on her brow, the cold sweat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The room seemed to press in on her, the stone walls closing around her. "How do I control it?" she asked, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "How do I make it stop feeling like it's consuming me?" The Vampire King's golden eyes were unblinking as he watched her struggle. He was silent for a long moment before responding. "You learn through discipline, through understanding. But the first step is to accept it, to stop fighting against it." His voice was low, yet it carried a weight that made Emily feel even smaller. She closed her eyes, trying to regain her focus, but the raw power coursing through her felt like it was still there, lingering just under the surface. "But I don't want this power," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, filled with frustration. "I didn't ask for it." The Vampire King tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "It is not about what you want," he said softly, but with an edge of finality. "It is about what you are now. You are no longer just a human. You are the heir to a legacy that comes with both power and responsibility." Emily could feel his words sinking in, each one a cold reminder of the trap she had fallen into. She wasn't just an innocent bystander in this world anymore. She had become a part of it, and now she had to pay the price. "The power is not a curse," the Vampire King continued. "It is a gift, but only if you learn how to use it. Otherwise, it will destroy you." Emily opened her eyes and met his gaze. The cool, indifferent expression on his face was implacable. "I want to learn," she said, her voice steady now, though the uncertainty lingered. "I want to understand. But it's too much. How do I even begin?" The Vampire King nodded, as if this was what he had been waiting for. "You start by understanding the rules," he said. "Every power, every gift, comes with rules. Your father knew this, and now, you must learn them." He motioned to the books on the table, their covers now appearing even older and more intimidating. "These will teach you the basics. But the real lessons come from experience, from within." Emily took a deep breath and turned her attention back to the table, staring at the books before her. She could feel her pulse quicken as she took her first steps toward accepting this new, terrifying reality. "What happens if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I can't control it?" The Vampire King's gaze flickered, the slightest hint of something in his eyes, but his face remained unreadable. "Then you will be lost," he said, his voice unwavering. "Not just to me, but to yourself." Emily's chest tightened at his words, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The weight of the consequences felt far more real now than it ever had before. She glanced at the books again. The idea of reading them, of learning from them, felt overwhelming. What if she couldn't understand? What if she failed before she even began? But as she reached out for the first book, she realized that there was no room for hesitation. She had already made the decision, whether she had wanted to or not. She had to learn. There was no turning back. The first page she turned to was covered in strange, intricate symbols, but as she stared at them, a strange sensation washed over her, like the symbols were speaking to her. It wasn't a voice, not in the way she was used to hearing one, but a kind of pull. The words seemed to make sense in some distant part of her mind, as though they were unlocking something deep inside her. She blinked, shaking her head, but when she looked down again, the words remained clear. The power was still there, faint but undeniable, and she realized that perhaps the key to understanding it lay within her all along. She continued reading, her fingers lightly tracing the lines of text, trying to absorb the ancient knowledge that seemed to pulse with energy. The room around her faded as she became absorbed in the words, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of peace, as if the chaos swirling inside her had momentarily subsided. But it wouldn't last. The Vampire King's voice broke through the silence again. "This is your first lesson," he said, his voice low but firm. "Mastering control is not just about understanding the power. It is about understanding yourself." Emily looked up at him, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "You may not want this, but it is yours," he said. "Embrace it, and you will become more than you ever thought possible." Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. It wasn't just about power. It was about who she was becoming, and that terrified her more than anything else. Emily's fingers trembled as she turned another page of the ancient book, the words on the page now clearer than before. It felt as though the power that had surged through her earlier was slowly becoming a part of her, unlocking pieces of her father's past, of her own future. As her eyes moved over the text, strange symbols and phrases began to make sense, though their meaning still eluded her. She could feel the book pulling at her, the magic in it resonating with the magic within her own veins. The Vampire King stood by silently, his gaze never leaving her, as though waiting for something. Emily's mind buzzed, overwhelmed with everything she had learned so far. The ancient power she had inherited, the debt her father had left her to settle, the responsibility now weighing heavily on her shoulders. "What now?" she asked quietly, looking up from the book, her voice strained. The Vampire King's eyes glinted with something unreadable. "Now, you must begin to understand the essence of that power," he said, his voice cool, yet somehow softer. "The knowledge in the books is just the beginning. Power must be controlled, or it will destroy you. You cannot afford to let it consume you." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure how to begin. How could she control something that was so vast, so ancient? "How do I learn to control it?" she asked, the question heavy on her tongue. "You will learn through practice," he replied, taking a step closer. "I will guide you, but you must be the one to do the work. Power is not given freely. It is earned, and it takes time to master." He extended his hand, motioning for her to stand. "Come with me. There are things you need to see, places you need to go to begin your training." Emily hesitated for a moment, her heart still pounding in her chest. But she knew there was no escaping this. She had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back. She stood, walking toward the Vampire King as he led her through the shadowy halls of the castle. The air seemed even colder now, the silence oppressive as they moved deeper into the fortress. Emily's mind was racing with questions. What was she truly being trained for? What would she become if she followed this path? The Vampire King's words haunted her. "Embrace the power, or it will consume you." They came to a large, open chamber, its walls lined with more ancient symbols and dark, towering stone pillars. At the center of the room was a large, circular platform, surrounded by strange, glowing runes. "This is where you will begin," the Vampire King said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Here, you will start to tap into the power that resides within you. But first, you must open yourself to it. You must let go of your fear and your resistance. Only then will you begin to understand how to control it." Emily swallowed hard. Her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened, but she knew there was no other choice. She stepped forward, feeling the weight of the Vampire King's gaze on her as she stood in the center of the platform. She could feel the cold stone beneath her feet, the air growing heavier with each passing moment. The runes around the platform began to glow brighter, their symbols pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "Now," the Vampire King said, his voice low, "let go of your fear. Let the power within you rise." Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her mind was clouded with doubts and fears, but she knew she had to try. She closed her eyes, focusing on the rhythm of her heartbeat, the flow of magic that now coursed through her veins. Slowly, she began to breathe deeper, willing herself to relax. At first, nothing happened. The room remained still, the only sound her own breathing. But then, as if in response to her concentration, a faint pulse of energy rippled through the air. Her skin tingled, and the hair on her arms stood on end. She felt it, the power, deep inside her, beginning to stir. It was as if the very air around her was vibrating, charged with a strange, otherworldly force. "Good," the Vampire King's voice came again, smooth and reassuring. "Now, let it flow through you. Feel it, understand it. Do not fight it." Emily hesitated for only a moment before she allowed herself to relax fully, letting the power rise within her. It was a strange, overwhelming sensation, like nothing she had ever felt before. Her mind swirled with visions, flashes of ancient battles, dark rituals, and forgotten pacts. She felt the raw, primal energy coursing through her, alive and infinite. It was intoxicating, but also terrifying. She was no longer just Emily. She was something more, something ancient and powerful. The runes around her glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the surge of magic within her. She could feel the Vampire King's gaze on her, but his presence was now a distant echo, drowned out by the growing storm of energy inside her. For a moment, she felt as though she might lose herself in the power, become consumed by it. But she fought to hold on, focusing on the strange force that had awakened within her. Slowly, she felt herself gain control, guiding the magic with trembling hands. It was an exhilarating feeling, like she was learning to ride a wave that could either carry her to victory or drown her in its wake. She opened her eyes, gasping for breath, her heart racing. The room was still, the energy in the air now calm, though she could still feel the pulse of magic beneath the surface. The Vampire King stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have begun," he said, his voice measured. "But this is only the beginning. Power must be tempered with control, or it will destroy you." Emily nodded, her mind still reeling from the experience. She had barely begun to understand what was happening to her, but one thing was clear. She had taken the first step on a path she could never turn back from. The days that followed were a blur for Emily. The power within her, the dark legacy that had been thrust upon her, began to settle into her bones. Every waking moment was consumed with the teachings of the Vampire King. She was no longer the person she had been before stepping into this cursed world. No longer just a daughter mourning her father's death. Now, she was something else, something her father had left behind, a future she hadn't asked for, but one she could no longer deny. The Vampire King had been patient with her, if not cold and distant. Each day, he guided her through the rituals, the ancient texts, the secrets of the world she had never known. Her training was exhausting, her mind constantly racing to keep up with the overwhelming flood of knowledge. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when Emily felt a strange sense of purpose rising within her, as if the power she was learning to control was something she had always known, something buried deep inside her. One evening, after hours of studying and meditation, the Vampire King summoned her to the great hall once more. She had grown accustomed to the silence of the castle, but tonight, it felt oppressive. As she entered the hall, she found the Vampire King standing before a large, intricate mirror. His reflection was distorted, the image twisted and unnatural, much like the power that was now flowing through Emily's veins. "Come closer," he commanded. Emily did as he asked, stepping forward until she was standing beside him. He turned to face her, his golden eyes gleaming with something she couldn't quite place. "You are learning," he said, his voice softer than usual, though no less commanding. "But you have not yet learned what it truly means to wield this power. It is not just about knowledge. It is about control, and control must be earned." Emily swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice hesitant. The Vampire King's gaze flickered to the mirror before returning to her. "There is more to this power than simply reading the books or performing the rituals," he explained. "You must become the power. Only then will you be able to command it." Emily frowned, confused. "Become the power?" she repeated, the words not making sense. "Yes," the Vampire King said. "You are not merely an observer, a passive vessel. You are the one who channels it. You must embrace it fully. Only then will you be able to control it in its entirety." He stepped aside, allowing her to see the reflection in the mirror more clearly. What she saw shocked her. In the glass, she saw not just her own reflection, but a version of herself bathed in golden light, her eyes glowing with power, her form radiating an otherworldly energy. It was her, but it wasn't. This was the person she could become, the person she was being shaped into. She saw herself standing tall, a figure of strength and authority. The fear, the hesitation that had plagued her since her arrival here, seemed to melt away as she gazed into the mirror. "This is what you are capable of," the Vampire King's voice broke through her thoughts. "But you must learn to accept it. You must stop fighting against it. Only then will you realize your full potential." Emily took a deep breath, her reflection still burning in her mind. Could she really become that person? The power that she had feared and resisted. Could she truly control it? Or would it consume her, as the Vampire King warned? "You will face trials," the Vampire King continued, his voice cold again, as though he could read her thoughts. "But they will shape you. They will test your control. And only those who pass the tests can truly become what they are meant to be. What kind of tests? Emily asked, the fear creeping back into her voice. The Vampire King's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. The kind that push you to your limits, he said. The kind that force you to face your darkest fears. You must conquer them, or they will conquer you. Emily's stomach tightened at his words. She didn't know what kind of tests he meant, but something told her that she wasn't ready. When do I begin? She asked, though a part of her wished she could delay it, even for just a little while longer. The Vampire King's expression hardened, his golden eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. You begin now, he said, his voice brokering no argument. There is no waiting. There is only the path before you. You will face the first trial tonight. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Tonight? She hadn't expected it to come so soon. But as she looked into the Vampire King's unwavering gaze, she knew there was no turning back. Whatever this trial was, she would have to face it. Come, the Vampire King commanded, turning away and leading her down a long, shadowed hallway. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air growing colder as they walked. Emily's thoughts swirled with fear and anticipation. What was waiting for her at the end of this hall? What kind of trial had the Vampire King prepared for her? The path was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Her life was no longer her own. It belonged to the power she was learning to wield. And if she failed the trial ahead, there would be no mercy. Only the crushing weight of failure. And Emily wasn't sure if she could survive that. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in front of Emily as she followed the Vampire King deeper into the castle. The air grew colder with every step, and the silence was suffocating. She could feel the weight of his presence behind her, like a shadow hanging over her every move. Every inch of this place felt alien, like she didn't belong here, but it was her reality now. The sound of her footsteps echoed off the stone walls, her pulse quickening in anticipation of what was to come. The trial. The first trial. She had no idea what it would entail, but her mind kept returning to the Vampire King's warning. You must conquer your darkest fears, or they will conquer you. Emily didn't know what she feared the most. Was it the power she was learning to control? The strength that could destroy her if she wasn't careful? Or was it the darkness that seemed to run through the very veins of this place, a kind of cold, ancient evil that surrounded her? She didn't know. All she knew was that she had no choice but to face whatever was ahead. The Vampire King's voice broke through the thick silence. We are almost there, he said, his tone as cold and emotionless as ever. This trial will test your strength, your resolve. But most of all, it will test your ability to control the power inside you. The power that your father left you. Emily's heart sank at the mention of her father. She still couldn't fully comprehend what he had done, what kind of life he had lived before she even knew him, what kind of deal he had made with the Vampire King. But she knew this wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about her. The power was hers now, and she had to learn to wield it, or be consumed by it. The hall opened up into a large chamber, its high ceilings disappearing into darkness. The floor was smooth and cold, like polished marble, but the shadows seemed to swallow everything around her. There was a strange sense of stillness in the room, as though time itself had stopped. At the center of the chamber was a pedestal, dark and imposing, with an eerie, glowing stone resting upon it. The Vampire King stopped a few feet from the pedestal and motioned for Emily to come closer. This is where the trial begins, he said, his voice low. You will face your fear here. It is not a simple test. It is not just a matter of magic or strength. It is a matter of your will. Will you embrace the darkness within you, or will you let it consume you? Emily's stomach tightened as she stepped forward. Her feet felt heavy, as though the very air was pushing back against her. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let fear control her, not after everything she had learned, everything she had endured. She reached the pedestal and stared down at the glowing stone. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its eerie light casting long shadows across the room. Touch it, the Vampire King commanded. Emily hesitated for a moment, the fear creeping back into her chest. But she forced herself to reach out, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the stone. The moment her skin made contact, the world around her shifted. The room seemed to fade away, and in its place, she found herself standing in a dark forest. The trees towered over her, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal hands. The ground beneath her feet was soft and damp, the air thick with an oppressive silence. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she realized she wasn't alone. The shadows in the forest began to shift, forming into figures, dark, twisted versions of herself, each one staring at her with cold, empty eyes. The figures moved toward her, their movements jerky and unnatural, their faces twisted in grotesque expressions. "What is this?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "These are your fears," the Vampire King's voice echoed from the shadows. "They are the darkness inside you, the things you've never faced. The more you resist, the stronger they become." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the figures closed in on her. She wanted to run, to escape, but something inside her told her that running would only make it worse. She had to face them. She had to face the darkness. "You must confront them," the Vampire King's voice came again, stronger this time. "You cannot escape your own fears. You must embrace them and take control." The figures were almost upon her now, their faces contorted in silent screams. Emily's mind raced. She couldn't let them overwhelm her. She had to do what the Vampire King said. She had to take control. With trembling hands, Emily raised her arms and concentrated on the power that still surged within her. She could feel it now, that raw energy, the same energy that had been so overwhelming when she first touched the book. She didn't have to understand it completely. She just had to use it. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy as she pushed the power outwards, directing it toward the figures surrounding her. The moment the power left her, the figures froze, their twisted forms dissipating into mist. The forest began to fade, the darkness receding as the light returned. Emily blinked, her breath ragged as the world around her came back into focus. She was back in the chamber, standing in front of the pedestal once again. The Vampire King was watching her, his expression unreadable. "You did well," he said, his voice softer than before. "But this is only the first step. There will be many more trials ahead, and each one will push you further, test your resolve in ways you cannot imagine." Emily swallowed hard, her body still trembling from the encounter. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice was not as steady as she would have liked. "I'll face whatever comes next." The Vampire King studied her for a long moment before nodding. "We shall see," he said. "The path ahead is dark, but if you can learn to wield your power, there is nothing you cannot do." Emily's heart raced, but now, more than ever, she felt the weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. She had faced her fear, but the journey was just beginning, and the trials ahead would be even harder. She wasn't sure she was ready for everything that was to come, but there was no turning back now. The darkness was hers to embrace, and the Vampire King was waiting for her to do just that. Emily stood motionless, her heart still racing from the trial she had just faced. The fear that had gripped her was slowly starting to dissipate, but the weight of what had happened remained. She had faced the darkness within her, and for the first time, she had not been consumed by it. The Vampire King's words echoed in her mind. This is only the first step. What came next? She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever trials lay ahead, but she knew she had no choice but to continue. The Vampire King turned away from her, his expression unreadable, as always. "The trials will become more difficult," he said, his voice steady and firm. "Each one will challenge your strength, your resolve, and your ability to control the power you now possess. Do not think that this was the hardest test. There is more to come." Emily nodded, the reality of his words sinking in. She had come this far, but the journey was far from over. She had proven herself by facing her fear, but would she be able to do it again when the stakes were higher? The Vampire King motioned for her to follow him, and without hesitation, she did. They walked through the labyrinth of the castle, past dimly lit corridors and towering, ominous doorways. Emily's mind raced, the weight of the coming trials pressing down on her. What would the next test be? What was she really capable of? And most importantly, could she control the power within her, or would it consume her like the king had warned? They reached a large, circular room, its walls adorned with strange, cryptic symbols. In the center of the room was another pedestal, similar to the one she had faced earlier. This time, however, the pedestal was empty. The Vampire King stopped and turned to face her. "This is where you will face your second trial," he said, his golden eyes piercing through her. It will not be like the first. It will be a test of your ability to manipulate the power within you. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Manipulate the power? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She had already felt the intensity of the magic, felt how it surged within her. Could she control it? Or would it slip through her fingers, as it almost had before? The Vampire King stepped aside, gesturing for her to approach the pedestal. Step forward, he commanded. The power is yours, but it is wild. You must learn to tame it. Emily hesitated for only a moment, her nerves flaring, but she moved toward the pedestal. As soon as she placed her hands on it, the room seemed to shift. A low hum filled the air, and the symbols on the walls began to glow, their strange patterns coming to life. The power within her stirred once again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the same uncontrollable surge of energy she had felt before. This time, it was almost as if the power was waiting for her to guide it. She focused, taking a deep breath. She imagined the energy flowing through her like a river, wild and untamed, and she began to shape it, to direct it with her mind. At first, nothing happened. She could feel the power swirling inside her, but she couldn't seem to make it do anything. Her hands clenched around the pedestal, and the air grew heavier, thick with potential. She tried again, this time focusing harder, reaching deeper within herself. Slowly, the energy began to move. At first, it was small, a flicker of light, a brief pulse that rippled through the room. But then it grew. The room lit up with the intensity of her power, the symbols on the walls flashing brighter and faster. Emily gasped, her concentration slipping for just a second, and the power surged again, this time too strong to control. The energy crackled, lashing out in all directions, and Emily's heart raced as she struggled to contain it. She could feel it slipping away from her, the magic wild and unpredictable. No, she thought, panic rising. I can't let it control me. She closed her eyes, shutting out everything except the power coursing through her. She reached deep inside, finding the core of her control, the part of herself that had learned to embrace the magic, to bend it to her will. Slowly, with steady breaths, she began to rein it in. The energy pulsed around her, but this time, she was in charge. She shaped it, directed it, her hands steady as she molded the magic into a sphere of light that floated in the air in front of her. She opened her eyes, and the sphere of light flickered before her, glowing brightly in the center of the room. Her chest heaved with exertion, but she didn't let the power overwhelm her. She had done it. For the first time, she had controlled the magic. The Vampire King's voice broke through the silence. Well done, he said, his tone approving but still distant. But this is only the beginning. Control over the power is one thing, but understanding its true nature is something else entirely. Emily felt a surge of pride at his words, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of unease. What did he mean by the true nature of the power? What was she really becoming? The Vampire King turned away, motioning for her to follow him again. Come, he said. There is more to teach you. The next trial will be even harder. Emily's heart raced as she followed him. She had passed this trial, but the road ahead seemed darker than ever. She had proven she could control the power, but now, she would have to prove she could control herself. The trials were only just beginning, and she had no idea what would come next. But she knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, she had no choice but to face it. She was no longer just Emily. She was something more, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The Vampire King led Emily through the vast, winding corridors of the castle, his steps echoing. In the cold silence, she had passed the previous trial, but as he walked ahead, she could feel the weight of the trial still to come bearing down on her. The air around them was thick with anticipation, and Emily could sense that the next test would be even more demanding than the last. She wasn't sure she was ready, but there was no turning back. The path she had chosen was irreversible. The trials were meant to shape her, to refine the power within her, and to ensure that she could wield it without losing herself in the process. But the deeper she ventured into the castle, the more she wondered if she was truly prepared for what lay ahead. The Vampire King stopped in front of a large, imposing door, its dark wood carved with intricate runes that seemed to shimmer faintly. Without a word, he opened it, revealing a vast chamber bathed in dim light. The air felt heavier inside, more charged, as though the very walls pulsed with energy. Emily's heart raced. What was this trial going to demand from her? The vampire king turned to face her, his golden eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "This is the final trial," he said, his voice carrying a certain finality. "It will test not only your control over the power, but also your loyalty. This is the true test of your resolve." Emily's mind raced. Loyalty? What did he mean by that? She had already given herself to this path, but was that enough? The vampire king didn't offer any further explanation, instead gesturing for her to step forward. As she crossed the threshold into the chamber, the temperature seemed to drop even further. The room was filled with tall, ancient pillars, their surfaces covered in shifting shadows. At the center stood another pedestal, this one covered in dark, swirling mist. Emily could feel the power in the air, heavier now, as if the very fabric of the room was alive with it. "Approach the pedestal," the vampire king commanded. "The power you wield is not just yours. It is tied to something far greater. You will have to make a choice, your loyalty, or your power." Emily's heart skipped a beat. What kind of choice was this? She had already embraced the power, hadn't she? Hadn't she already made the decision to follow this path? But now, it seemed, the vampire king was telling her that the power came with a price that might force her to choose between herself and something greater. The mist around the pedestal began to swirl faster, the shadows deepening, as if it were drawing her in. Her mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear. This was a test, and it wasn't one she could afford to fail. She stepped forward, her body tense, her breath shallow. As her hand reached out to touch the pedestal, a surge of energy washed over her. She gasped, her skin tingling as the power within her responded, reacting to the force in the room. But this time, it wasn't just her own power. This was something else, something older, darker, and more ancient. The mist began to form shapes, and Emily could feel herself being drawn into it, her mind swirling with images of distant places, ancient battles, and forgotten promises. She saw flashes of her father's face, but it was distorted, his eyes filled with regret and fear. And then she saw something else, a shadowy figure, its features hidden in darkness, standing at the edge of her vision. The figure was reaching out to her, its hand extending toward her with a sense of purpose, of longing. "Who are you?" Emily whispered, her voice shaky as she tried to understand what she was seeing. The figure did not respond, but the air grew colder, the mist thickening around her. "What do you want from me?" The figure's presence intensified, and Emily could feel the pull, a force trying to guide her toward it, to draw her into its depths. The vampire king's voice broke through the mist, sharp and commanding. "This is the choice," he said. "The power you have inherited was never meant to be yours alone. It belongs to the lineage of those who came before you, to a force older than even the vampires themselves. You are bound to it, but your loyalty will determine how you wield it." Emily's mind raced. Loyalty? To what? To the vampire king? To the legacy of her father? To the power itself? She felt torn, unsure of which path would lead her to the future she wanted. The figure in the mist seemed to draw closer, its presence overwhelming her thoughts, pulling her toward it with an unyielding force. The power surged inside her, urging her to act, to choose. She could feel the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. "If I choose this power, what will become of me? What will I become?" "The decision is yours," the vampire king's voice echoed, but this time, it carried a weight of finality. "You can embrace the legacy of your bloodline, the power that courses through your veins. But it comes at a cost. You must decide, your loyalty to me, or the power that calls to you from the depths of your ancestors. Only one can be yours." The mist swirled around her, and the figure's hand reached out again, its shadowy fingers almost touching her skin. Emily's pulse quickened as she took a step back, her thoughts racing. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong choice? She could feel the power surging inside her again, but this time it was different. This time, it wasn't just the raw, untamed magic she had learned to control. This was something far older, something that would change her forever. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of it all. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to make the choice. But the time to decide was now. The shadows around her seemed to close in, and Emily knew she had no choice but to act. Whatever path she chose, it would define her. It would determine who she would become. And that terrified her more than anything else. Emily's heart was a drum in her chest, the beat pounding in her ears as the shadows in the room pressed in on her. The figure in the mist reached out again, its hand trembling slightly, as if urging her to make her choice. She could feel the weight of the Vampire King's words on her shoulders, the pressure of the decision threatening to crush her. Loyalty or power? The figure, now so close she could almost touch it, had a presence that was both inviting and terrifying. The power that had surged through her before was now a constant hum beneath her skin, urging her to give in, to let it consume her. But the question that hung in the air was still unanswered. Was this the path she wanted to take? She could feel the pull of the figure in the mist, the call of the legacy her father had left behind. This was the world he had chosen, the one that had led to his debt with the Vampire King. Was this the future that awaited her? To become something more, to embrace the power within her? Or did she have a choice in the matter at all? The room around her seemed to darken, the mist swirling faster, and Emily's thoughts became a blur. She glanced back at the Vampire King, his golden eyes watching her from the shadows. His expression was unreadable, but there was something there, a flicker of something. Was it approval? Hope? Or something darker, more calculating? She didn't know, and it terrified her. Her fingers twitched, the power inside her awakening once more, but she hesitated. The figure in the mist was so close now, and she felt it, a strange sensation, like a bond forming between them. But Emily didn't want that. She didn't want to be controlled by this force, this dark energy. She didn't want to lose herself in it. But was she already too far gone? The Vampire King's voice cut through the chaos in her mind, his words both soothing and demanding. The power is yours, he said, his tone even. But it is not free. You will have to decide. Your loyalty, or your power. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, trying to clear her thoughts. She wasn't sure what she feared more, the idea of becoming someone else, something she could never take back, or the terrifying thought of walking away from everything the Vampire King represented. She had already started down this path, but could she really embrace it fully? Could she live with the consequences? The mist swirled around her again, but this time, the figure did not reach out. It merely stood there, watching her, waiting for her to make her choice. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she finally understood. This wasn't just about choosing between loyalty or power. It was about choosing who she wanted to be. This was the moment that would define her. She was standing at the edge, looking into a future she couldn't fully see, but one that she would shape with every step she took. She could feel the power surging inside her, the ancient magic of her bloodline calling to her. It wanted to be unleashed. But was she ready to wield it? She stepped back from the pedestal, her mind still spinning. She had been given this gift, this curse, this power that came from a place darker than she could ever understand. And she was being asked to control it, to channel it, to make it her own. Could she really do that? Was she strong enough? The Vampire King's presence was like a shadow looming behind her. But this time, she didn't turn to face him. Instead, she closed her eyes again, reaching deep within herself. She could feel the pulse of the power, the legacy of her father, but she also felt something else, something that was hers alone. Her own strength, her own will. She wasn't just her father's daughter. She wasn't just the heir to this dark legacy. She was Emily, and she could decide who she wanted to be. The figure in the mist seemed to sense this, its presence less oppressive, as if it had finally understood that Emily would not be controlled. The shadows around her seemed to shift, the mist swirling faster. But now, Emily felt a strange sense of peace. She could feel the power inside her, yes, but it didn't control her. She controlled it. Slowly, the figure in the mist faded, its presence dissolving into the air like smoke. The room returned to its normal state, the shadows lifting, the oppressive weight easing. Emily opened her eyes, her chest still heaving with the intensity of the trial. She could feel the Vampire King's gaze on her, but this time, she didn't flinch. She had made her choice. I choose myself, she whispered, her voice steady and strong. The Vampire King didn't respond at first. He studied her, his golden eyes flickering with something unreadable. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, finally, he spoke. You have made your choice, he said. But remember, there is always a price. The power you have chosen will not be easy to control, and there will be those who seek to take it from you. Emily swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. The Vampire King's lips twitched into something like a smile. We shall see, he said, his voice cold and final. The path ahead will not be easy, but if you truly understand what you are becoming, you may yet find a way to control it. And if you succeed, you will have power beyond imagining. He turned and walked away, his steps echoing in the now silent room. Emily stood alone, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had chosen her path, but the journey was far from over. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing. She would face it, no matter the cost. The power was hers now, and it was up to her to decide what to do with it. Emily stood alone in the chamber, her heart still racing from the trial she had just faced. The Vampire King's words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The path ahead will not be easy, but if you truly understand what you are becoming, you may yet find a way to control it. The weight of the decision she had made settled into her chest, but it wasn't the weight she had expected. The power that had once seemed overwhelming now felt different. It wasn't something to fear, it was something she could use. The air in the room shifted, and Emily knew that whatever came next, she was no longer the same person who had stepped into the castle all those days ago. She had embraced the power, accepted her destiny, and now, she had to decide what kind of ruler she would become. The Vampire King's presence was gone, but the room felt charged with an energy she had never felt before. It wasn't just the magic that ran through her veins, though that was strong, pulsing beneath her skin. It was something deeper, something tied to her very essence. She had made a choice, but the question remained. How would she use what she had become? She turned slowly, her gaze falling upon the pedestal where the mist had once swirled, where the power had surged. Now, it was still, silent, waiting. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath. She could feel the magic inside her, could feel it thrumming with life. But it wasn't just a force to command. It was a part of her soul. And in that moment, she realized something. The power was not a separate entity, something she could control without consequence. It was tied to her will, to her choices. It would be shaped by her, for better or for worse. As she opened her eyes, a quiet resolve settled within her. The Vampire King had given her the power, but it was hers now. The responsibility was hers. She would wield it, but she would do so on her own terms. The weight of the decision no longer seemed so heavy. She had chosen this path. There was no turning back, but there was no need to. She was ready. The doors to the chamber creaked open, and Emily turned to see the Vampire King standing there, his figure silhouetted against the dim light. His golden eyes were unreadable, as always, but there was a shift in his expression, a flicker of something like approval. You have done well, he said, his voice low and measured. But this is only the beginning. Emily nodded. She had known this wouldn't be the end. She had proven herself, yes, but there were still countless challenges ahead. She still had so much to learn. But she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had faced her fears, embraced the power, and made the choice to take control of her own destiny. And now, she was ready to face whatever came next. What comes next? She asked, her voice steady, no longer filled with uncertainty. The Vampire King regarded her silently for a moment, then stepped forward. You will begin your rule, he said, his tone holding a certain gravity. The trials you have faced have prepared you, but the real test is yet to come. Your power is vast, but it will not be enough if you do not learn to use it wisely. Emily felt a surge of determination. She had already chosen to embrace her power, but now she would have to learn how to wield it for more than just her own gain. She had to protect those she cared about, protect the world from the darkness that threatened to consume it. She would not let it control her. She would not let it turn her into something she wasn't. I'm ready, she said, her voice calm but firm. I will learn. I will use my power, but I will not let it define me. I will be the ruler I choose to be. The Vampire King studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he gave a slight nod. Very well, he said, his voice softening just a touch. Your journey will not be easy, but you have the strength to succeed. Remember, you are not alone in this. There are others who will challenge you, but there will also be those who stand beside you. Emily felt a flicker of hope, a quiet reassurance. She wasn't alone. She had chosen her path, and now she would forge it with her own hands. She would not be defined by the darkness, but she would learn to control it, to bend it to her will. The Vampire King turned and started toward the door, but before he reached it, he paused and looked back at her. "One last thing," he said. "Do not forget that even the strongest power can be undone by the smallest of choices. Your loyalty is as much a part of this as your power. Be careful who you trust." With that, he was gone, leaving Emily alone in the dim chamber. She stood still for a moment, processing his words. Loyalty, trust. The power she had chosen would not only be about strength. It would be about the choices she made, the alliances she formed, and the people she decided to protect. She had already made one choice, the choice to accept the power, to take control of her destiny. But now, she had to make another. The path was still uncertain, and the road ahead was long. But Emily knew one thing. She was ready. Whatever came next, she would face it with everything she had. She was no longer just a girl lost in the shadows. She was a ruler, and she would not be consumed by the darkness. She would become the light that guided the way. In this captivating tale, Emily finds herself drawn into the mysterious and dark world of vampires, where ancient power and fate collide. As the story unfolds, Emily discovers that she has inherited a legacy of magic and power, one that her father left behind in a debt to the Vampire King. The twists and turns of her journey mirror the timeless themes found in classic vampire stories. Emily must face trials that test her strength, loyalty, and control over the overwhelming power inside her. With each challenge, she grows stronger, but the price of her newfound power becomes clearer as she confronts the shadows of her past and the choices she must make. Emily is faced with the ultimate decision that will determine her future. This is a powerful addition to vampire stories, with themes of self-discovery, loyalty, and the battle between light and darkness. If you're a fan of captivating vampire stories, this narrative offers everything you crave: powerful transformations, intense trials, and complex characters. Join Emily as she navigates a world filled with ancient magic and dark legacies, and immerse yourself in this gripping tale that stays true to the rich traditions of vampire stories. The journey ahead is full of danger, and Emily's struggle to master the power within her is just the beginning of her transformation in these unforgettable vampire stories.